Good afternoon. Welcome to our fifth roundtable in preparation of our 18th International Conference of the World Association for Sustainable Development. These roundtables are designed to excite people about the topic of the conference, and we have been doing them from 2017. But this year, as you all agree, it has been, or we have witnessed something we have never seen before. So the focus of all these roundtables, this one and the one we did before, and all the others roundtables, we have experts from all over the world. They're going to share with us their expertise, their knowledge from their houses, because all of us across the whole world, we are in lockdown. And today I have the privilege, and I'm very pleased to have three distinguished experts from Chicago, from Muscat in Oman, and from London, David, Beverlee, and Hemavathy. I'm going to introduce them shortly. The topic we're going to discuss today is quite interesting, and we're not going to finish it in one session, as you can agree. We're going to be discussing the socio-economic impact of the COVID-19 or the coronavirus pandemic on achieving sustainable development goals. As you all know, since 2015, the United Nations declared or encouraged or endorsed the 17th Sustainable Development Goals. These goals have been the outcome of many research, scholars, policymakers, government officials. They have worked very hard for many years to try to come with a globally agreed goals that all countries should really achieve by 2030. Now, countries are different. The US, in the UK, in India, in South Africa, in Sudan, in Middle East, we are all different in our progress towards achieving these goals. And all countries have been making huge efforts to achieve these goals by 2030. Some have already gone far ahead on others on different goals. Now, this pandemic, which something came like a shock to the whole world system, I call it the whole world system, because even when China started seeing the first incidence of this COVID-19, we are still not well awake here in Europe or in Africa or in the Middle East or in India about the crisis which is coming to us. No one ever expected what we have witnessed in the last 2 months or 3 months. No one ever expected we will be locked down completely. Completely, our life is being locked down. So what we're going to discuss today, the socio-economic impact of this COVID-19 or the coronavirus pandemic on our progress to achieve sustainable development goals. So we already have been working hard to achieve these goals, but now we have this pandemic, which is affecting our entire life. In economic terms, everyone agree, all countries are now talking about the huge impact this pandemic has already impacted on us, on even being able to buy goods, to buy services, to provide services. Every country now is focusing primarily in the last 2 months or 3 months on life and death of its nation. Every Chancellor of Exchequer, every Minister of Finance, if you ask him or her, the answer is, I am now focusing just on survival. I want to make sure I can do everything in my capacity, no matter how much it costs, in order to make my citizen alive. And that's what has been doing. Now people start thinking and discussing and working, and started lots of work on what will happen next, because this pandemic has seriously affected our lives. So I am going to start introducing my guests today. I am very pleased to have 3 guests with me, and the 3 guests I have, they are experts in their fields, and they are going to discuss 3 of these 17 sustainable development goals. So we're going to discuss today health, which is of no doubt the most important issue now across the whole world. And in health, we're going to discuss about how this particular target has been severely affected by this pandemic. Beverlee, as usual, it's a great pleasure. I introduce Professor Beverlee Anderson. She's a Professor Emerita of Business Beverlee in California, San Marcos University. Beverlee has a wealth of experience. She has been the dean of the business school. She has been the president of the Marketing Educators Association, and she has spoken in all over the world. She has a tremendous experience in international business marketing. So Beverlee, the floor is yours, and you're going to talk to us about Sustainable Development Goals number 2. Am I right?
That is correct. Yes.
So the floor is yours. Go ahead.
The elimination of hunger. And I'd like to put this in context. Even before coronavirus, it was estimated that there were over 800 million people in the world who had chronic hunger. And if you know, in the continent of Africa, they've suffered droughts, they've suffered floods, and corruption and wars. So you find that even the locusts have been coming to them. And now on top of that, they have coronavirus. But it's not just Africa. It's the developed world as well as the developing world who are experiencing hunger for the first time in many cases. And part of this is due to the complexity of the global supply chain for food that we've developed. This has been a very complex system that is developed. And as the saying goes, that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And unfortunately, the global supply chain for food has been experiencing some tremendous weaknesses in the links to get the food to the people who need it. Part of it has to do with the growing, the farmers. Part of it has to do with processing. Part of it has to do with transportation. And part of it has to do with we, the consumers ourselves, who some of us were hoarding and making all sorts of problems. And you have restaurants have gone out of business. Where you can get food has gone out of business. It's very, very difficult. Shelves are empty in grocery stores. So we're all experiencing a problem of food supply that we've never experienced before. I think that is the type of thing I will be discussing.
Now, Beverlee, that's very interesting start. Now, if I can just start by asking you, Beverlee, now, from what you have, I know you're going to get more into details shortly, but from just the out scene, I mean, I know clearly the first thing people, they can easily relate to you easily with supply chain. Well, I mean, when this pandemic started 2 months ago in the UK, for example, people start really behaving completely in a very strange way. To some extent, people, they couldn't believe what they can see in front of their eyes. And I remember there was a nurse who came out of her shift to find there's nothing in the supermarket to eat from and so on. Now, from the outset, we can see that supermarkets are back, supply chain is back reasonably. We are not fighting on food now. If that's your feeling worldwide, I mean, the US is a big country, of course. What is your, just at the starting point, what can you tell us? Do you think we are reasonably having enough supply in the next 2-3 months? We may not struggle because things are not yet cleared.
Things aren't cleared. I do believe there is enough food. I think the distribution and getting the food to where it needs to be is the problem. But there's also another problem with hunger, and that is so many people are out of work. And the average American family only had $400 in savings. I know that's not that much. So many times they don't have the money for food. We find food banks that are giving out free food. We have lines of cars 4 and 5 miles long trying to wait to get the food from the food banks. And many of them have said they didn't anticipate this at all. And one of the other things you find even in grocery stores, prior to this, the grocery stores were using a just-in-time system of inventory control. They had only about a 2 to 3 day supply in their inventory. And then when all of the consumers started taking everything off the shelves, it's taking a long time to gear back up the processing to get to fill that supply chain.
Now, if we continue on that line of the supply chain, now with all this lockdown airports, I know cargo is still running, flights are happening, but in the past, that's not how the food is being coming to us, going from us. Now, do you see with this lockdown, we might suddenly be in lockdown? That means in the US, you will eat what you have there. And in Africa, we will eat what we have there. And in Asia, what we there. Are we going to be, in terms of supply chain, we're going to be locked down? Do you expect that?
Well, I think on some things we're going to be locked down. During the Second World War, we had victory gardens. Both in the UK, you had them, and we had them. The people were growing their own food. But you find with shipping, many of the ports are now closed. And countries will not allow the offloading of goods that are even on the ships. So this is one of the problems. And as you said with airplanes, many of the perishables were shipped during air freight, and many of the planes are not going now. And the price of shipping versus in air freight has gone up astronomically. And you also have many people are hesitant to buy perishables because they only go to the grocery store or get groceries maybe once every 2 weeks. So perishables aren't a good thing to have.
Okay, I have maybe of interest here. This is a question from Rashid Badawi. Said, what are the priorities to protect the vulnerable people like children and the elderly? I mean, I know this might not fall into well with what you have just said, but I'm trying to pick up all the question earlier rather than because I know they will build up. But in the policy and strategy, say like the US and other countries, are we going to? Do you think things will ease up? Yes, we are looking forward to get out of the lockdown to our houses, but do you expect us in terms of getting what we want in terms of we're going to have a priority in terms of type of food, in terms of type of supply to children, elderly, because the focus now has been really on these two sides, particularly the elderly here, and then maybe now the children. What have you been seeing now from what you have been working on now?
Well, two things. With the elderly, most of the grocery stores in the United States have special hours for seniors, very early in the morning. I go to the grocery store about 6:15 in the morning. And there's very few people there, and this works out very well. As far as children, one of the major problems is most of the schools are closed down. And this is in Africa as well as the developed countries. And most of the children used to get their food at school. Their lunches were served there. Many of them had breakfast at lunches. And many of the schools are having difficulty trying to figure out how to feed the students. This has been a major problem in the US. Originally, they tried some school buses going around to deliver food to the homes of the children. That didn't work. Then they had that you had to go to the school to get to the food, to pick it up there for the children. This is a major problem of the distribution of how to get it to the children.
And now, Beverlee, maybe I will just ask you this, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm not sure if you are fully aware, countries in Africa, for example, people, the supply chain or the way it works naturally before this pandemic, people, they have to go every day out of the house, buy their fresh fruits and vegetables and bring them back to the house. So the idea, like in the OECD's countries, America, Europe, is quite different. So they used to eat fresh, but that's not the issue. But the issue is they don't have the concept of having storage in the house, freezing stuff like we do here in England. We always, before the pandemic, we bring stuff, we keep them in the fridge, we freeze, defrosting, and so on. They don't do lots of defrosting in Africa, for example. And this is a continent where the WHO is expecting now the peak is going there. Now in Europe, we are kind of reaching the peak coming down. Africa is now is picking up now. What can you see to this kind of continents, millions of people, billions?
Well, one of the things that many of the African countries, I do have the number here of how many there are, and I forget exactly, is 33 of the African countries have lockdowns.
Yes.
And this is one of the things that they're not allowing street vendors. They aren't allowing the open markets. So therefore, you have even the farmers, the small farmers who can't get their food. There's no place they can go to sell it, because they aren't allowed to do it in the street markets. And this is causing all sorts of problems in Africa.
Exactly.
I don't know how it's going to be solved. I really don't. I wish I did know how.
Now, and this issue, by the way, Beverlee, is the issue now causing, but thank you very much, Beverlee. Stay with us. Let me introduce to you Dr. Hemavathy from Muscat. She's an assistant professor international business. And thank you, Dr. Hema, for taking the time to speak to us, and I really appreciate it. Now, you're going to talk to us about the socio-economic impact on particular target, which is Sustainable Development Goals target number 3. Now, I know you have different, you are in Muscat, but you also have background and experience of India, but also internationally. We're going to listen to you. So, Hema, the floor is yours, and we look forward to listen to you.
The world is facing a very hard time now. Okay, due to the pandemic situation of COVID-19, needed a containment measures and first priority to implement and to control the pandemic situation. If health is a fundamental need for a prosperous, productive society, if health is in panic condition, it is going to reflect in consumption, production, travel, recreation, and overall well-being of the nation. And the world has experienced many such cases before, but this coronavirus pandemic, at one stretch, it is affecting the global countries. Around 212 countries are suffering now, which is having every country has a health crisis due to this pandemic coronavirus. And if you see that a study recently revealed the virus, due to this virus spread, every country is spending billions and billions of dollars as a direct medical expenses, and they have to provide hospital beds, ventilators, where the current supply is more than the demand. As you see that the study also revealed that the direct medical expenses is around $3,045 for the infectious corona patient need initially. Also, this is many times, more than 4 times higher than the other cost, which is earlier we have spent for in controlling the influenzas. And also, in many cases, the patients need continued medical assessment, because the virus infection is very rigorous and it is very serious, whereas the lungs and other organs are directly affected. So that many of the survivors need a continued medical assessment, where on an average, they need to spend around $3,994. And if you see the real scenario, the healthcare per capita for expenditure for healthcare goods and services consumed during a year, USA ranks number 1, where the healthcare expenditure per capita is only $10,246, whereas in developing countries like China, it is $440. In Bangladesh, it is $36. In India, we are spending $69 healthcare per capita, and in African countries and sub-Sahara countries, it's around 20 and less than $20. And also, if you see the GDP contribution for the healthcare sector, it falls around 10.3% for Australia, and for Canada and UK, it's only 6.5% and 7.6% respectively, where in developing countries it's much more lesser. In China, it is only 4.4%, and India, we are only spending 3.5% of our percentage contribution in the GDP to the healthcare sector. This is going to be a very serious issue where all the nations around the world, where the healthcare expenditure will be going to increase at a rocket speed. And if you see that, for example, this overall, if you see the healthcare demand is in the developing countries are much more less compared to the developed nations. So now it's the right time that we need to focus adequate resources for healthcare system. That is the immediate need we need. As the first priority, the resource should be available for the healthcare system and services. We need to expand the testing facilities, additional testing facilities. In the current scenario, the healthcare workers are not sufficient, so that we can rehire the retired medical professionals, and purchasing of personal protective equipment is very important. And there are in some cases, in some countries, the protective equipment is not sufficient, which has been provided by the hospital or by the government. In some cases, it is a very, symptomatic, very, very sad situation that the doctors, in order to protect themselves, they are spending their own money and buying their protective equipments. So we are in that scenario now. Apart from that, this is in this situation, there should not be any trade restrictions on medical and healthcare products. It has to be completely eliminated. And also, the countries exporting countries have to see that whether these requirements are reaching the needed people. There are so many countries who are desperately needed, where the healthcare system is very poor. So those sort of measures are very immediately needed. And apart from that, there are so many other economic impact which we are going to face due to this expenditure, financial crisis, some like that. Recent IMO report states that the emerging countries will face a health crisis, external demand shocks. There is going to be global financial conditions, a plunge into commodity prices, and it's going to affect the economic activity of commodity exporters. But the advanced nations will have the issues of experiencing widespread outbreaks and deploying containment measures, which is going to project a negative growth rate in these countries. And apart from that, if you see, like the coronavirus scarring effect, it will take a couple of years. Like it's going to create a trickle-down effect everywhere. And no nation is going to get escape from this scenario. And if you see, the developing nations have a better healthcare, and they have a better liquidity capacity also to overcome this health crisis. But unfortunately, developing countries with the poor healthcare systems, and they are more vulnerable population, will end up in borrowing excess fund for to take care of the health crisis, which is going to give them a lot of fiscal deficit, which is going to take many years to overcome this post-pandemic period. In this, we really need global participation to overcome this issue. To what extent, how? It's all a big question mark. many like WHO, World Bank, IMF, everybody is behind this global participation. And the World Bank has recently supported US dollars 160 billion in the course of 15 months to respond to the rapid spread of coronavirus. And they have allotted to many developing countries as in a different phases. The first phase, they are going to see, as in the first phase, they are going to deal with the emergency side. That the first priority is to, we want to mitigate the COVID-19 pandemic situation, at least in medium or in long time. But the second response is more towards the other pandemic like water, food system, and economic impact, and it goes much more beyond. When we are talking about water, which is one of the important sustainable development goal, water and better sanitation. And if you see, nearly 3 billion people all around the world are not having easy access towards what is the sanitation facilities. So water and sanitation is one of the important aspects to eliminate the spread of COVID-19. When 3 billion people all around the world, they don't have a proper hand washing facilities, what precaution we are going to give? Around 785 million have difficulty in accessing clean, safe drinking water. What is the answer for this question? In many sub-Saharan and African countries, they are living in existence, mere existence. What is the solution for all these things? Many, and this is the right time, at least we can see we are investing in water, okay, and investing in water to improve the water facilities is going to reduce many waterborne diseases and under 5 years mortality rate. This is very common in many of the African countries. And this is not a non-regretting investment. It is urgently needed. And also investing in water projects, which is going to generate some employment opportunities in such areas, dry and arid areas, so that at least few people can get their livelihood. So, so that the economic policies is really need to be very much streamlined, like to we all, the global nations, can gain economic recovery and eventually like the pandemic situation will fade.
Okay, now I have a very good intro to this health crisis. I will come back to you, but the question, maybe I will let you start thinking about it, maybe if you want to answer it, because I'm going to pass it over to Beverlee. This question came because Beverlee was trying to pick up while you are fixing your technical issues. The question is being now, this is a very legitimate question. In Africa, Beverlee start talking about this, and I will go back to her to finish it up. But these people in Africa, for example, in countries like Africa, Sudan, Egypt, whatever, all these countries, they have to go to the market every day. We will be discussing that before you rejoin us. Now, you can't be, he said here, for example, he said to you, in Africa, most people depend on everyday earnings, income by going to market, so they cannot be locked down. They cannot. How can they will be helped during the lockdown? Of course, from a health perspective, you don't want them to go to the market. But and I will take that question to Beverlee. But what can you say on this question? Yes, someone will say to you, yes, I know if I go, I will increase the chances of other people being infected, and I will get it myself. But as someone advising him to stay home for a health reason, what can we offer to these people in terms of answer to these people? What is the answer?
Actually, this is one of the main case of high spread of COVID-19 in the recent 2-3 or the past 1 week in India. People are, especially in the Maharashtra state, people are like daily wages laborers. When this lockdown happens, what will be the situation like vegetable vendors, people like that? Okay, so storing and using such sort of culture is not there in many countries. And also, even you want to store or you want to have a huge purchases consumption, you need your substantial savings. No, when they are living in mere existence, how can they store for a week or for a month? So the people are living on their daily basis, daily routines. So that's what's the situation in many African countries, even in India, in many parts. So most of them migrant laborers. How do they save money for a purchases of for a month or a week? So this is a real problem. Income is one of the important factor. Sufficient people who are affluent, who have sources, can buy and store and keep. Who don't have that sort of income strategy, income facility, so what they will do.
And I think this is going to continue because, you know, like here in the UK, or rich countries are paying salaries for the people, and they're saying to them, stay home, we'll pay. But this in Africa is not the case. Thank you very much, Hema. Stay with us and let me bring on Beverlee. Beverlee, I will give you the floor to continue, but maybe you can pick up from this first question and you continue. What can you say to these people like in Africa? They can't stay home because they need to go and pick. So you can continue what you started earlier.
Yes, one of the things that, of course, the UN has recommended that they possibly have transfer cash payments to people. But I'm not sure about the governments in Africa, whether they could possibly do that, cash payment, transfer payments to people. That is just one of the recommendations. We here in the US, people earning less than, I believe it's $75,000, got a cash transfer payment to buy food. Also, there's a possibility of opening up more food banks if that were possible to give it to the people. But it's a standard real problem between the economy and health. And we're facing it here in the US, and every African country is going to be facing it. And I think it's very scary because I think they are going to continue to go out to try to earn a living. And they're going to, when it starts spreading in Africa, I'm concerned is how much it might spread. And there's some predictions that Africa may be set back 30 years if coronavirus really starts impacting them. And that is frightening. That's all I can say.
Now, Beverlee, do you like to continue in the SDG 2, and then we continue the questions before I go into to David?
Okay, that's right. Is David available?
Yes, David is available. I can see him here. Welcome, David. We can see David here, and we will join you. Yes.
I just wanted to say a few more things about, we were talking about the retailers and how they only had a 2 to 3 day supply, but those are gradually getting restocked in the developed countries. But I am concerned about the consumers and the idea it's also impacting, of course, the restaurant industry. As we can only have restaurants do takeout business right now, some states in the United States have allowed restaurants to open. But what we find is that many of the restaurants say they can't make enough money to open, and their employees wouldn't make enough money if they can only have 25% of the capacity of a restaurant, because they're operating on a very thin margin as it is. And concerns are that small independent restaurants are going to go out of business. The only thing we're going to have left are the very large chains, such as a McDonald's or a Starbucks, that can actually absorb this type of situation. So it's really going to impact the economy as well. I think I think that this shortage of food, though, is going to really lead to some very dire circumstances, which I believe David is going to address in his comments.
Now, before you go, Beverlee, maybe I ask you this question and then I can let you go. Now, this question also came, how far the food supply is well enough? I know you started saying something about this earlier. How far this food supply is well enough, especially after finishing the COVID crisis? Because we will clearly need time after we are released from this lockdown for these shipments to move around, for all these vessels to go. Any specific plans, if not enough, to maintain it for global needs? Do you have any way to offer?
We have some major problems for the supply because a lot of harvests are not being done. Farmers are plowing under their harvest because they have no workers to harvest the crops. And I know this is true in the UK and it's definitely true in the US. Most of the people who work on our large farms to harvest the crops are immigrants, or in the case of the US, many of them are illegal immigrants, which I find is very ironic because the US government has declared them essential workers. At the same time, they don't allow them to be undocumented workers to work. So you have this very difficult situation. And so we have many fields that are being plowed under because there is no one to harvest it. And you also have, as far as meat products go, the pig farmers are killing off, euthanizing their small piglets because they can't get the mature pigs to the meat processors because they're closed down. So they don't have any room for the new pigs that have been born recently. So they're euthanizing the pigs. I don't know how this is all going to work out. Dairy farmers are pouring out their milk because they have no way to get it to the people that need it. Normally they supplied it to schools and to restaurants at a variety of places, and they have to milk the cows once a day. You can't store milk for a long period of time. And this is causing a major problem also. And they're encouraging people to buy cheese so they can at least get some cheese processors to take the milk and do it. So there is probably going to be some shortages, I think, and it's going to take quite a while to get these global supply chains back up to where we were before.
Okay, thank you very much, Beverlee. Thank you very much. Stay with us and I will come back to you. Now, let me bring in David. David Otto is an expert. Hello, David. Thank you very much. I know you have made huge efforts to join us. Thank you very much. David is an expert on counterterrorism and organized crime. And now, if we could, it might be a good transition from Beverlee. She just left us with a very good statement, said there will be shortage. We're already in shortage of food, and normally shortage of food is one of the reasons for many crises we have witnessed over the past, particularly in Africa and so on. Now, you have advised many countries, you've been advising Interpol or big organization worldwide. Now, you're going to highlight for us or to discuss with us briefly the Sustainable Development number 16, I believe, the peace and security. Now, I will, the floor is yours, David. And if you can also take over from where Beverlee left it, we will eventually going to face shortage of food, no question, in the next, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever it is. But in terms of the impact of this COVID-19 on global peace and security, can you also expand on that one?
Thank you, Professor Alem. First of all, you know, it's the COVID-19 is an unprecedented pandemic, as we all know. This has not been experienced before, and you know, this is the first time, you know, in modern history where, you know, the entire universe, you know, so to speak, seems to have gone on a shutdown. Yes, you mentioned the Sustainable Development Goal 16, which is the UN's peace and security, and this has put a huge test to that maintenance of peace and security. But it doesn't actually, come down to that in perspective. It looks at the level of preparedness, how countries are prepared for one kind of disaster. Perhaps, a lot of countries were thinking about a nuclear crisis. A lot of countries were focused on terrorism. They were focused on kind of a civil unrest. And then you have the broken biscuit, where it comes from a biological agent. And this, my experience, by talking to a lot of countries and meeting them and trying to advise them, you find out that most countries don't have the capacity and capability when it comes to their CBRNE, which is the chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive units. Most countries have a very low level of preparedness, and that has been exposed by COVID-19, barely. So I think, that's a very important area which, has been impacted. And I'm sure that the United Nations and all the other countries will be looking very, very much and thinking about how do we recover from this. Remember that the African Union recently launched the silencing of the guns, which is an agenda 2063, which is a 50 years agenda. And that has just been, made more louder by the COVID-19, and it's exposed, again, as I said, the existing systems that, countries have, in terms of looking at, their security. A lot of people look at COVID-19 as a health issue, of course. This is a health pandemic, but when you look at it from a health pandemic perspective, you look at it from the treatment and the prevention through a vaccine. But from the security perspective, we look at it from how can this impact on the security of the state. The first question is, why didn't the security of all the big countries that we know, how come they didn't spot this very early, when, the COVID-19 began in Wuhan? The question is, a lot of governments would have to do a security review because you have what you call predictive analysis in security. And that means, you have to make sure that your security is built and strategized in such a way that it can predict what happens in future. But COVID-19 has exposed that most countries were not prepared for this kind of pandemic. And the only thing countries had to do is what they've done now is to run down and, we are now hiding in our homes because, of the pandemic. So I think it's important to have that very clear from the security angle and how that will impact, within the economy as well and other sectors. So, we talk about, for example, the increase in disinformation and misinformation, which has come as a result of COVID-19. And that also shows you that, there is this level of insecurity, which is based on misinformation. We don't know where the disease began. People are not even, assured of how the disease is spread from one individual to another. There is discrepancy in terms of whether people should wear masks or don't wear masks. Countries have reacted to lockdowns in different ways. Some of them have opened up, their countries, like some countries in West Africa and Central Africa. So I think it's important to understand that in analyzing the impact of COVID-19 from a security perspective, although one may be tempted to look at it from, saying that Africa would be a lot more at a disadvantage, we have to also pay attention to the particular dynamics of Africa. First of all, Africa is not just a one state. You have different countries that have different capacities to deal with the virus. Egypt, for example, North Africa has a lot more advanced, health capacity. But what we found is that they've got more, cases. In West and Central Africa, we have a few cases. Cameroon, for example, is one of the countries that, leads in one of the highest number of coronavirus cases. But of course, you have to look at the level of testing. How are they testing these patients? What kind of symptoms are they looking for? So that cuts across, the African spectrum, but also the West, because, there is no kind of agreement in terms of whether the symptoms which are being tested for individuals are symptoms of COVID-19 or they are symptoms of other underlying causes. But I don't come from a medical background, so I will leave that to the medics to deal with. But what is very important here, which we have to take into consideration, is how this will impact on the economy of African states. How will it impact on the security? So, for example, I'm not really concerned about the spread of COVID-19 in Africa as much as people would say. The reason being, yes, Africa doesn't have the health systems that it's supposed to have. It doesn't have good governance. It doesn't have a comprehensive database to know which citizens have been impacted by the disease. It doesn't have a good tracking system. But I think what Africa has for its advantage is that 75% of the African population is under the age of 25. And then you've got another 10 or 15%, which is under the age of 50. So what you find in Africa is that they have a natural resistance to this COVID-19 virus as compared to other Western states. So what I see there is an advantage. However, each African country has to be able to look at its specific dynamics and see how it can prevent, the disease from spreading to the older and most vulnerable population. So this is what I see within the African dynamics. But because the systems are not robust enough, because the government doesn't have, most of the governments do not have a system where what you call the social security system, where they can provide for basic necessities for the people that would be on lockdown. What most of the countries have done, Ghana, Cameroon, Ivory Coast, what they've done is they've relaxed some of these lockdown measures. But the fear is once you do that, a lot of people would take that for, we've resolved the problem of COVID-19, as I've seen in countries in Central Africa like Cameroon, where people have gone to the streets celebrating that the government has opened up the lockdown. So these are the kind of measures which I think, governments have to be very, very careful the way that they put these measures in place. Of course, as Beverlee and Hema mentioned, Africa has a problem of structural resources. But again, this disease is one which has caught a lot of countries, were unaware. The UK, for example, is struggling. The United States is struggling. Italy has been struggling. So I don't see Africa as, being any better. But what I think is going to save Africa is its population. It's the ability of Africans to be able to withstand these kind of diseases. I mean, I've been to Africa. I'm born in Africa. I visit Africa every day. Every time of the year, I visit a lot of Western countries in Asia. But the difference is that Africans have this, underlying way of dealing with things, which I believe might just act as a saving grace. But it is too early to call, Alam, and maybe we can see what happens within the next couple of months from this time.
We put the speaker on. Now, to clarify one thing, David, from your follow-up with globally, do you see the level of organized crimes? Because you are an expert in organized crime as well. Because we have, I can't remember, 3 weeks ago, if you remember, our Home Secretary here told us about a gang which is they've been caught smuggling drugs in boxes as mask or something. So that level of organized crime, we have seen it here in the UK. Do you see that across the world it is happening as well?
I totally see that. There are where there is chaos, Professor Alam, there is always opportunity, and the pandemic has presented an opportunity for organized crime groups to find a way to make the best profits out of this. But not just organized crime groups. We've seen a lot of even terrorist organizations in the Sahel, in Central Africa, in Afghanistan. We've seen the same. They take advantage of the vulnerabilities of the government to plan a lot of attacks. I think COVID-19, what is brought to to bear for the state is that a lot of things will change. Terrorist organizations too are impacted in a negative way, but the positive way that they would see this is they might be able to use this time to plan for attacks. They might be able to use this time to understand that a virus of this nature can put the whole world on its knees. So we have to be very careful how terrorist organizations might exploit this biological agent in future. But of course, if they use it, they too will be affected by it. But we have to look at all these issues in place. Yes, you're right. There has been an increase in organized crime. There's been goods being sold, fake goods being sold to organizations. There's been a lot of online mischief going on, people contacting other people saying they have things to sell. So I think this is a time when most people have to be much more aware, taking into consideration that a lot of people spend their time online because they are locked down. So online has become the new normal for a lot of people. And criminals have now moved from the streets, and they're now developing strategies to be able to get people from online platforms. So all these dynamics, have increased. And I see this as an area which, really needs attention from a lot of states.
Okay, I will come back to ask you about these criminals in a way, but let me, because I can see questions are building, let me just quickly bring this one. Most of SMEs, small and medium enterprises, face a big challenge on the financial level because the company does not operate a guarantee period. So what is the appropriate plan to support SMEs owners in heavily indebted countries, in developing countries or least developing countries? I mean, in the UK, without even looking at the least developing countries here, the government is trying to help them so they can stay on business. Do any one of you can offer anything, particularly you, Beverlee, about what can be done for these least developing countries about offering support to SMEs?
Well, the only thing I could suggest would be possibly if you take the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, give small loans, they could even be microloans to the small and medium-sized businesses that operate, microfinancing. In the US, we're doing it. I know we're a developed country, but there's loans that small businesses can apply for, although it's all messed up, and I'm not going to go into that. But I think that you need some international organization to recognize that does have the resources to start making small loans or microloans to some of these small businesses. That's the only thing I can think of that might work.
Okay, and Hema, in India, are you aware of any help governments is giving to SMEs in India, for example?
A debate is going on in this case where we have lots of SMEs and MSCs doing a vital role in Indian development. Probably the state governments may, it's only a debate, it may waive suppose if they have taken any bank loans, they may waive those 3 or 4 months interest, and this repayment period will be added later. They can pay the loans later, not during the lockdown periods. And we have so many incubators who are supporting and helping them in terms of non-NGOs and supporting them in financial aspects and business perspectives. Also, national development banks also planning to provide some financial support for the SMEs. Each state has their own autonomy. They are working within their own limitations.
Okay. Now, David, maybe I can let you to start on this one. This question is quite interesting. It's quite a long question. Maybe you need time to see it here. I will read it for all of you. It says here, I think it says, exaggerated alteration of statistics information by some local governments, health departments in Africa for international financial benefit. If I understand this correctly, there have been an accusation, some countries, they do change or alter the statistics in order to qualify for some financial benefit from like WHO and so on. if I understand this correctly. If wrong, please, the person who said the question can clarify me. So what the question is saying, and this alteration of statistical information by local governments, like in Africa, for this financial benefit, it is creating unnecessarily fear rather than awareness and increasing the already existing disturbance. So by doing so, they create more disturbance and fears. And as a result, the question is saying, is quite a long question. It says, the locals will not normally, they are careless. They do not respond quite positively as you expect them to this kind of crisis. So what can you shed the light here? I mean, are you aware of cases like this?
Again, as I mentioned to you, you know, there is a high tendency for fraud, and you know, especially in systems which, you know, are very loose, you know, and corrupt and disorganized. There is a high tendency for even governments, you know, departments to increase, you know, the figures of COVID-19 patients, or prove to, you know, some of these international organizations that they have a high level of COVID-19 patients, especially where there is a benefit that, you know, comes as a result of, you know, having, you know, a lot of patients of COVID-19 cases in your country. You know, this comes down again to systems, you know, how robust systems that, you know, deal with this COVID-19, where there is a clear case that a system is not robust enough, there is no accurate database, it is difficult to tell how many patients are tested, you know, COVID-19 positive, or how many have been treated, then you would have this abuse of system, because, you know, some people want to benefit out of this. I think, you know, the important fact to note is that most countries that have had a good handle of COVID-19 are countries that were prepared before COVID-19, you know, arrived. Most countries that are reacting to it, you know, they are not doing very well. So you would have, you know, opportunistic countries taking this COVID-19 to, you know, to make, you know, unnecessary benefits, you know, out of international organizations. And of course, Beverlee mentioned that, you know, the IMF and all these international organizations should consider helping African countries with loans. I mean, it's a very good idea, but the problem with that is if you add loans into a system which is already, you know, very fragile, then they've got to still pay back those loans.
Yes.
I think instead of these countries, you know, clamoring for loans, you know, their internal governments should be able to be providing that. Internal banks should have the capacity to do that at very, very low interest rate. But, you know, what you don't want to do is to open the floodgates, because once you mention that there is an access for loan to, you know, XYZ small businesses, everybody wants to get the loan. You know, but the problem is not getting the loan, is how do you pay it back?
Yes,
so,
exactly.
You know, and at what expense, you know, do you pay that back? So I think it's very important to always look at that very critically.
Now, because we aimed for 45 minutes, but we exceeded that. But I apologize to all the people who are following us about the technical issues we had. Now, to conclude, I would like to give you a quick round, the three of you. This is what I think if a policymaker or a government is watching us now, or they will watch this video later, they will say, okay, fine, what can you advise me? Now everyone is focusing on survival case. Everyone is want to make sure his citizens are safe. Now, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, possibly, our life is still not going to come back to a reasonable normality. I know it might take 1 year, they said, but people, they will come back and say, let's go and see what the SDGs are saying. Let's continue with the work we stopped when we have the pandemic. So what is your advice for policymakers, the three of you? Start with you, Beverlee, or maybe Hemavathy, maybe you start with you because you did the health. What advice do you give them in terms of sustainable development goals? Now, they might say to you, it's not a priority for us. All we need to do is to make sure we protect our people. But once they are clear from this pandemic, hopefully in the next 6 months, whatever, what is your advice for policymakers?
Okay. Economic recovery may happen, but who's going to answer for the human loss? Many people have lost their lives, healthcare workers, scientists, many vulnerable people lost their works, and many people lost their beloved ones in the families. What is the response? We developing nations, everybody at one or the other cause, we are reliable and responsible for the loss. Some may be the breadwinners, somebody may lost the beloved ones in the families. So my part, health is very important at any time. Now, COVID-19 has given an scar, like we have learned a lesson from this. Now, global countries need to support to each other to overcome this worst scenario.
Okay. So we need to support each other.
And there should not be any cold war at this point of time. This is not the time for that.
Okay.
Global nations are suffering. We need to find a new sunrise, a virus-free sunrise, where we all have to, we need a fresh air to breathe. So the research department finding out vaccines or to overcome not only the COVID-19, maybe in the future, what all other pandemics are going to arise. So health preparedness is very, very, very important at this point of time. That's what medical authorities have to take care of these things.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Very good 3 points. And Beverlee?
I was going to say, to recognize food is survival. One needs food. And I think that many countries have really just not paid much attention to their global supply chain or their food supply chain and look at the interdependent parts associated with it. And I think they need to start monitoring this to become more aware of how interdependent it is and to perhaps have more redundancy in the systems. And also, I think in some cases, you're going to say, maybe we should try to get more local small farms. As I mentioned, victory gardens very early. Maybe we should go back to planting vegetable gardens, and maybe the idea of doing some canning that my grandparents used to do all the time is something that we should start considering, and not just something one does as a pastime, but maybe it's a really important part that we should diversify our food sources in that way.
Okay, excellent, excellent. And David?
I think what is very important is that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And this is what COVID-19 has taught each and every one of us. Each country, should have an emergency response manual. Each country must be able to have a strategic approach on these kind of pandemics. They must prepare. They must have a strategy. They must have a way of dealing with it, and they must spend money in terms of building these capacities. I think knee-jerk reaction doesn't work. When you have this kind of pandemic and you want to react to it, it would always be too late. So I think it's very important that we take that into context. But also, I think my last point is that, first of all, there is no one size fits all. Each country may face the same virus, but each country has its own unique dynamics, which they can deal with this virus. So I think it's important that each country develop its own countermeasure against a pandemic of this nature, but at the same time, collaborate with other countries. Because if one country resolves it and the other country doesn't resolve it, in a global society as we live today, everyone's beard is on fire.
Okay, thank you very much, David. I mean, I will finish this roundtable by saying there's always opportunities, and I think one of the 2 examples of this opportunity from any crisis we have. One of the opportunities, for example, because we've been locked down, all of us staying at our houses or homes. So we managed to communicate and we managed to do what we can, and we try to be creative to use this technology we're using is already existed for many years. The Zoom, the Microsoft Team, what we're using now, Be Live. So you can see technology is really the driving force of solving most of our problems. Now we are able to communicate. And also in the past, these roundtables, we used to do them, we call them regional roundtables. So if the conference is in the Middle East, we do regional roundtables in the region, like in Bahrain and so on, like if it is Saudi Arabia but this year we've been even, the opportunity was that let's bring a global viewpoint. So with that, I would like to thank all the three distinguished speakers. I'm really grateful. And the beauty, you can see we managed to speak. Hemavathy is from Oman, from Muscat. Beverlee is talking to us from Chicago in the US. David is talking to us from London. And the three of us, we managed to bring all this together. And we will promise you, we will continue on this particular theme on the impact of the socio-economic impact on all the 17s. And we will carry on with in the next, just keep watching once we advertise it. Thank you very much. And I'm really grateful for your time. And we have to stop here. We can take more than 1 hour. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So please remember, if we all help and do a little bit, it will make a big difference.